Does eating cold foods have a negative effect on individuals during their menstrual cycle? Hypothesis and experimental design. So, let's start with the hypothesis. Eating cold foods has a noticeable negative effect during menstruation. To test this, we'd split participants into two groups. One group eats cold foods during their period, while the other sticks to warm or room temperature foods. The main things we'd track would be participants, people with similar ages, health conditions, and menstrual cycles to keep things consistent. Cold foods. We're talking about things like refrigerated or iced foods. Warm foods. This would be the comparison group, consuming foods at body temperature or higher. Metrics. We'd track symptoms like cramps, bloating, fatigue, emotional changes, digestion, and body temperature. Over a few cycles, participants would follow these eating plans, logging their symptoms and potentially getting some medical data, like hormone levels or body temperature, to measure more precisely. Ideally, this would go on for a few months to catch any variations in symptoms from one cycle to the next. Caveats and limitations. Now, here's where things get tricky. 1. Participant variation. No two periods are exactly alike. This is perhaps the most significant limiting factor for our experiment in that we would need to control for all other factors by finding individuals that are otherwise identical on the dimensions of hormone levels, lifestyle factors, diets, and tolerance. It is when we have individuals that are comparable on the following dimensions that we can conduct our experiment. Menstrual symptoms can vary wildly between people due to genetics, lifestyle, or conditions like endometriosis or PCOS. This means it could be hard to pin any changes directly on cold food. Some participants might already have intense cramps or digestive issues that have nothing to do with the food temperature. 2. Placebo effect and expectations. If someone believes that cold food will make their symptoms worse, they might feel more discomfort, even if there's no actual effect. It's hard to eliminate this kind of psychological bias, even in a well-designed experiment. 3. Cultural beliefs. In some cultures, it's a widespread belief that cold food is harmful during menstruation. This might influence how people report their symptoms in the experiment, making it difficult to tell if the effects are real or just reinforced by cultural expectations. 4. What exactly is cold? There's also the issue of defining what counts as cold. Is it the actual temperature of the food when eaten? The temperature at which it's stored? Or maybe even foods that have a cooling effect, like cucumber or mint? This definition needs to be clear, but it could get overly simplified, missing some nuance in how different foods affect the body. 5. Ethical concerns. If we ask participants to consume large amounts of certain cold foods, like ice cream, over a long period, it might pose health risks, especially for those with underlying health conditions. Balancing safety and experimentation would be a challenge. 6. Hormonal fluctuations. The menstrual cycle itself involves intense hormonal shifts that affect each person differently. Even if cold foods had some minor impact, the larger changes caused by hormones might overshadow any measurable effects. 7. External variables. There are so many other factors at play, like stress, sleep, hydration, and exercise, that influence menstrual symptoms. It would be almost impossible to control all these variables outside a very controlled lab setting, which makes drawing clean conclusions difficult. Conclusion. In theory, you could try to design an experiment to figure out if cold foods affect menstrual symptoms, but there are a lot of moving parts. People's experiences with their periods are so varied, and cultural beliefs around cold foods add another layer of complexity. Plus, trying to control for things like stress and hormonal fluctuations would be really tough. In the end, this topic might be better suited for observational studies rather than a strict scientific experiment. It's likely that the results would remain inconclusive or subjective,